everybody. It's just Morgan Streetman today.
I know. I thought you were looking around for her there for a minute.
Where's my good friend at? Where is she?
Well, I can tell you where she's at. We are on baby watch, and we thought that baby was going to be here yesterday, but apparently Roxanne went into labor at 8:45 this morning.
Oh, boy. Well, I hope they put the show on in the delivery room, and then Daviana
I don't think she's in any mood to be listening to the show.
Well, I was just going to say, Daviana will come busting out. Like, there's Morgan. I love listening to him.
Break her in early there, listen to the Morgan Streetman show.
That's right. That's right. Well, I tell you, you were talking about traffic today, and boy, I just barely got here. Traffic was absolutely terrible.
Where was it terrible for you? Because
for me, it was terrible in downtown Tampa trying to get out of the Channel Side area. And they have streets closed for Water Street. Now, boy, I wish they could give us some kind of way to know what's open, what's closed, because I waited in a long line just to find out. I had to detour and turn around and go back the other way.
Well, you're a new neighbor in downtown. You just got there, and as far as the traffic patterns, that just changed.
Oh, man.
So it's probably going to be there your whole tenure of living down there and working now for the next, 5 years.
Well, it's not so bad if I just have to go to work, but when I try to come over here, I'm on the clock. I've got to be here by a certain time because the show goes live no matter what.
Did you happen to use the Howard Franklin or the Gandy?
I usually use the Gandy, but I'll tell you,
through that?
It's not great. I'm not happy with it. With all they cut it down to one lane off to Crosstown, and then Gandy is always pretty crowded now, and all this construction that they're doing. And I guess it'll be great. Although the people living down there and working down there don't think so.
Well, there we go with our local content. We already took care of that.
Well, I had some other local content too, although it's not really super local, and maybe we'll jump into that instead of trying to take a quick look back here, but we've got a lot to cover. It was a big news week. It was a big news week last week, and a lot of issues that we've talked about on the show before. So I want to try to at least get back and update folks on some of those issues. And, before we start that, I have to say, I really wish we had more than about 42 minutes a day to deal with this stuff, because we try to get through so much, and we don't always get to fully unpack the issues. But one thing that happened last week, and if you're a social media person, you would have seen this going on social media last week. I don't know if you saw it, Pat George, but there was a young man, about a 14-year-old boy, who got beat up pretty severely on the school bus.
By some bullies.
Yes. And the mother said that it was all because, I guess, a couple of weeks before he got beat up, he had actually worn a MAGA hat, a Make America Great Again, one of those red hats that President Trump made so famous during his campaign, actually worn a MAGA hat to school, and then had taken some bullying because of wearing that, and then actually took the hat off, tried to, not be bullied, tried to calm things down and whatnot, but apparently the damage was done. He had been identified. This is what the mother says. He had been identified as being somebody who was a supporter of President Trump and or the Make America Great Again movement. And, of course, from there, apparently the bullying started and just got worse and worse and worse. Now, this took place in Hamilton County, Florida, which is just north of Lake City and the Live Oak area. It's right on the Georgia border, just south of Valdosta.
I'm surprised that area.
Well, you know what it goes to show you.
Only takes one.
Well, first of all, why are you surprised? Let me ask you that.
I really thought that the majority of Florida, Georgia, aren't they on Trump's side?
Well, what you've got in this country, maybe the majority is, but we're not talking, 100%.
That's why I said it only takes one.
Even the majority, you might be 60, 70%. You're still going to have a solid number of people that are anti-President Trump. And, what I think this kind of shows you, if you've listened to the language that's been used, and we've seen it happen over and over and over again in this country, and we see Antifa out west having these violent protests and, assaulting and battering and almost killing Andy Ngo before. So, we've seen a lot of evidence of this violence coming from, and I don't know if we want to call it the left or not, but violence coming from the left or violence coming from people who are against President Trump. And then you look at the language of the politicians like Maxine Waters, like Nancy Pelosi and others who have said, don't let these people be comfortable in public, go out and confront them, do whatever it takes to let them know they're not accepted here, et cetera, et cetera. And the language has been language of violence. We even had Greta Thunberg say that the leaders of the world ought to be put up against the wall, and then shot. Of course, she backed off on that. So, oh no, that's just a turn of phrase in Sweden. We say put up against the wall means be held accountable. Yeah, right. That means put up against the wall and shot, and everybody knows what it means. And you can't unsay those kind of things. And that's what these people say. You know, they say, if you don't agree with me, if you don't believe what I believe, and you don't want to handle these problems in the way that I want you to handle these problems, then you're deserving of violent attack. And then we see that repeated over and over and over again. And that's the kind of mentality, at least it appears, that led to this poor 14-year-old boy being severely beaten on the school bus, and he wound up in the hospital.
Well, apparently he doesn't have the right to wear that hat.
Is that where we're at in this country?
I guess so.
Well, I don't accept that. I don't agree with that, and I don't accept that. That's wrong. He has the right to freedom of speech. It's one of his fundamental rights. It's enshrined in our Constitution. If none of that matters anymore, then we don't have a country anymore. Period. The end. Then the country's going to break down into conflict with each other, which is not what we're about. We're supposed to have a civil society where we're free to say what we want to say. We're free to have our own opinions. We try to discuss things. We try to do it rationally. We try to win the other side over to our position. But anyway, if you go and you look this story up, and again, if you haven't seen it, there was a young man in Hamilton County, Florida, who was beaten very severely on the bus. The young man's mother says that it had to do with him having worn a MAGA hat to school. Now, the attack actually occurred in late November, like the 21st to the 22nd. I don't remember exact day, but it was one of those 2 days. And what else I thought was interesting is you have this kind of attack, and then the superintendent of the schools comes out with a statement.
Don't say it. You're only going to make it matter.
Look, the guy is more concerned, the superintendent, and I was trying to pull that up here, but it's not coming up because I was going to read to you part of the statement. But I'll tell you what, he is more concerned about the fact, he says he's very disappointed that the school district has been portrayed in the way that it's been portrayed. I mean, what about the student who got beaten up? What about the conduct of the school employees on the bus? What about, there's any number of things that you could be disappointed about, but he's more concerned with the image that the school district has, which apparently is the image of not protecting its students if they don't agree with certain political positions. So, I think we're going to see more and more of that as time goes on. I think it's really a sad development, and I feel bad for this young man who got beaten up. But if you haven't seen that video, you got to get out there and find it. You probably can only find it on Twitter or some other social media because the mainstream media won't report that. When the Covington kids were up in D.C. and they thought they had, this storyline that they approved of, where the Covington boys stood in the way and blocked this Native American tribal elder, Vietnam veteran hero of this country. Remember that nonsense?
Oh, yes.
They couldn't stop running with that. That's all they could talk about. And it turned out they were totally wrong about all that. In fact, they're in the process of being sued, and they are being sued. It survived a motion to dismiss for defaming that young man in particular. But now we've got something going the other direction, a story that could be national news. I mean, if that's national news, somebody stands in front of someone else. On the National Mall, he stood in front of someone else. Okay, well, if that can make national news, and I think a student getting beaten up on the bus, allegedly for supporting President Trump, also could make national news. But you won't hear about it.
No.
Guaranteed, you will not hear about it at all. Well, let's take a quick look back at the election over in the UK last week, because it was a big week last week in the UK. And we told you to be watching that, and probably you did, because boy, did the Conservatives ever run away with the election. They got the biggest election victory that they've had, the Conservative Party, which is also called the Tories, since Margaret Thatcher. And Labour, which is the primary opposing party, the more left-wing party in Britain, is the Labour Party. They had the worst showing since 1935, almost 100 years. They've not had so few seats in Parliament. So the Conservatives picked up 47 seats. They'll now have 365 seats, which I think it's like 320-something is required for a majority, maybe 327, if I'm remembering correctly. Labour lost 59 seats. Think about that. 59 seats they lost. They're down to 203. They barely hung on to 200 seats. I mean, and again, that's the least number of seats in Parliament that they've had since 1935. Another interesting development is the Scottish National Party picked up 13 seats. They now have 48 in pretty much all of Scotland. Now,
how is that going to help Brexit?
Well, I would say that, as Boris Johnson says, they're going to get Brexit done now. Brexit will be done, I would believe, at least the initial part of it, by January 31st. They've now got the majority votes. They can vote it through, the plan that they'd already agreed to with the EU, and that they wanted to vote through earlier this year, but they couldn't because Labour and Jeremy Corbyn were obstructing the vote. But now this will go through by the end of January this year. And are we back? Can you hear me? Okay, welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. I wasn't so sure there. I couldn't tell if I could hear myself, but I just turned my headphones down, so that's probably why. That's probably why I couldn't hear myself. But, well, I'll tell you what, an interesting week last week. We just finished up kind of talking about the UK election and how it's going to help them get Brexit done by January 31st. And I said this year, but that'd be next year. Well, if you're counting the calendar year. If you're just counting the time passing, then it will be this year. But they'll get it done by January 31st. Then, of course, they'll have about a year of negotiation to go to set up, their trade relationship with the EU. I think we can also look forward to them setting up a good trade deal with the U.S. So I think that's coming, which will be interesting. I think we may be able to do a lot of business with the U.K. now once they're out of the EU. And maybe even some of that business will be sort of a transshipment type business where EU products and U.S. products transfer through the UK to the other party. So from the U.S. goes to the EU, and from the EU it goes to the U.S., but it passes through Great Britain, and that's called transshipment. And it may allow us to avoid some of the tariffs because, as much as we hear about tariffs and, it's going to ruin the economy, it's a terrible idea, President Trump, to put tariffs on everything. Well, the only thing is, if you look at other countries, they have a lot of tariffs. Like the EU has a lot of tariffs on U.S. products. So everyone else has got tariffs on us. What's historically been the case is we haven't put any tariffs on anybody for many, many years. So, and President Trump has changed all that. And I think you've seen some positive outcomes in some of the trade disputes. I mean, in other words, he's reworked NAFTA now to the U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement. And, that's in the process of being passed, we understand. And so, I think a lot of positive things have come out of this. And there's the Phase 1 China trade deal, which a lot of the people in the news media are saying is not a deal, is not well done, etc. You've got to understand the leverage game that President Trump is playing with China. We're not giving up much in the Phase 1 deal. If the Phase 1 deal, as supposedly negotiated, does go through, then the Chinese are going to have to purchase $40 or $50 billion of our agricultural products all at once. And these are things that they need. Now, they're trying to develop sources outside the United States so they're not so reliant on our agriculture, but they haven't got that fully in place yet, so they still need our agriculture products. And, of course, that would be good for our farmers right now.
Rice has already been going in there.
Well, a lot of things go in there. Absolutely.
I was surprised to see rice, though.
Trade is ongoing. It's not like trade's come to a complete halt. Trade is ongoing. And just remember, the Chinese are just paying the tariffs. They're paying the tariffs largely on behalf of their businesses. So this Phase 1 deal, really, we don't give up much. Yes, we're not going to put additional tariffs that were scheduled to go on December 15th. Those are not going to go on, but those can go on at any point. I mean, the Phase 1 of the deal is just step one. It's not the full deal. And President Trump does want to do the full deal, but this is sort of giving China a little bit of an opportunity possibly to save some face. And you know how important that is in China and the Far East. The idea of the face saving, the idea of culture, the idea of failing being associated with being bad is part of culture. So if you fail, it's hard to come back from because it means that you're bad, you're not a good person, etc., because you failed. So for them, saving face is a big deal. It's a big part of self-esteem and how they view their personhood. And also that expands out to the country itself and the way they look at themselves in the country. Speaking of people who ought to maybe take a look at themselves, did you hear Hunter Biden's got his new wife? I mean, she's pregnant again. I mean, this man knows how to have children. I'll tell you what, he hasn't figured out how to not have children yet with random women, and sometimes including his wife. Remember, because he just had a child not so long ago with the woman who, is out in Arkansas named London Roberts, and she's now suing him for child support. And his answer to that is sort of, I don't have any money. All those millions of dollars that I made, and we're learning more and more about that each day, thanks to some of the good work of Rudy Giuliani going over to the Ukraine and doing some investigative work on Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and the money they got paid, allegedly through the Burisma board, but which appears to have been laundered, according to Rudy Giuliani. He's spent all that money. That's what Hunter Biden says. And it's just amazing. But he didn't show up in court in Arkansas. He didn't want to give a deposition. He doesn't want to give his financial information. He wants all that to be sealed. Just like the rest of that whole group, the Democrats in power, Joe Biden and others, they don't want the rules to apply to them. You or I, if we had a child with somebody in Arkansas, they would make us give up all our financial information. That's something people don't like about, the family law system, is they got to file these financial affidavits, which then can get out. People can leak them out. That information can get out there. It's supposed to be protected, but it finds a way oftentimes of getting out. Well, Hunter Biden wants it officially sealed by the court.
Imagine that.
But the news of the day, what we were originally referring to, is that he is having yet another child, and this with his new wife, Melissa Cohen Biden. So we congratulate them and wish them all the best in that endeavor. And speaking of endeavors that are failing, the impeachment endeavor that the Democrats have been after is absolutely falling on its face. I don't know if you saw the Judiciary Committee hearings last week, but they have passed two articles of impeachment through the Judiciary Committee in the House, and they are for obstruction of Congress and abuse of power, neither of which amounts to a high crime and misdemeanor, neither of which is particularly subject to being proven or disproven, both of which are just political, activities by the House trying to attack the president. There's nothing about holding up aid to the Ukraine. There's nothing about colluding or conspiring with Russia. None of what we've heard for the past 3 years has come to pass. In other words, what they've told us were the crimes for the past 3 years that President Trump had clearly committed. None of that's come to pass. None of it's true. All the investigations have found that those allegations were false. And that's even after you have people like Adam Schiff telling you that he's seen the evidence. He's seen more than you and I have seen, and trust him. There is strong evidence of President Trump colluding with Russia. He said that. But then the Mueller report comes out, and it finds specifically no evidence of collusion, no conspiracy. So you've got people who've been lying to you for years through their teeth, and I don't know, do you think that a leopard can change its spots? I mean, we hear from these people today. Do you believe them now?
The frustrating part about that is the impeachment was started before he was president.
Of course it was. And Nancy Pelosi let that slip the other day that the impeachment's been going on for years now. Of course it has been. And they're going to get up on TV and they're going to say things like, I'm very prayerful about this situation. And I'm so concerned for what this might do to our country. And we've got to keep an open mind. I haven't made up my mind yet. You've heard all these kind of phrases from Pelosi. You've heard them from Adam Schiff. They're lying to us. I mean, they have no compunction about getting up there and just lying to our faces. And unfortunately, the media totally enables them because the media never calls them on this stuff. They never really put these people on the hot seat. And we saw some of that yesterday, not being put on the hot seat, but being given essentially a pass. We saw some being given a pass yesterday to some of the folks who were on the Sunday shows, including James Comey. But just to stick with impeachment for a moment, I think this is pretty interesting. Some Democrats are already jumping ship.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. There were a lot of nays.
Well, this is a pretty big deal because you've got a New Jersey Democrat who's literally going to be changing parties.
Yeah, what is that about?
And he said it's because of impeachment, because he doesn't want to lose. He doesn't want to lose his reelection campaign that's coming up because the people in his district don't want to put up with this nonsense, this impeachment nonsense, which is totally fabricated. But that's Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey, Congressional District 2, and he's actually announced that he's going to be switching parties this week. Now, let's run through just real quickly some of the newspapers because, this is the media with one voice. They speak with one voice. Nobody is standing up to this except for a few people like Paul Sperry of Real Clear Investigations, and a few other people are really standing up to this media noise, but they don't get any national airtime to speak of. What gets national airtime is the uniparty, the single voice, which is pro-impeachment. Listen to this list of newspapers whose editorial boards have all called for impeachment. The New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, the LA Times, Salt Lake Tribune, the Tampa Bay Times, the Orlando Sentinel, Boston Globe, New York Daily News, Chicago Sun-Times, Philadelphia Inquirer, and San Francisco Chronicle. All of those newspapers, their editorial boards have called for impeachment. Well, impeachment for what? There's been no high crimes and misdemeanors. It simply hasn't occurred. You can't just impeach the president because you don't like him, because you wish he didn't win the election. That's exactly what the Democrats are trying to do. And it's backfiring on them in a huge way. And we're glad for folks like Jeff Van Drew who are switching parties, because that's the kind of fact, that's the kind of information that the public is really going to key in on, as they call it in the media. The optics of that are terrible for the Democrats. We're going to cover some of the Sunday shows and what happened with the IG report when we come back. Welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Here's a story I don't know if you heard about before we jump into more of what happened yesterday on the Sunday shows, but there was a story yesterday that came out. It didn't receive a lot of attention yet, but that is a Saudi-based student here on a visa, was at the University of New Mexico, and was found with a gun and a list of University of New Mexico professors that he allegedly planned to murder.
Did not hear this.
He was trying, apparently, at some point recently to purchase an AK-47 for purposes of carrying out this additional terrorist attack by a Saudi student. So we'll let you judge for yourselves what all of that means. Of course, we saw the recent attacks at the Pensacola Naval Air Station, where the Blue Angels are based, and that person was a Saudi who was here on a visa and was somehow able to purchase a firearm. We've not really received the information as to exactly how that occurred. Now, you shouldn't be able to purchase one if you're not an American citizen, right? The Second Amendment should apply just to American citizens. It's our Constitution, after all. But in any event, this Saudi was able to purchase the firearm that he used in the terror attack on the Pensacola Naval Air Station. And then we had the grounding of 300 Saudi pilots here who are here training to be pilots. We talked about that some last week. And 300 of them have now been grounded.
We are too free with our niceness in this country.
Aren't we, though? I mean, we give so much money away to all these other countries. We give them free defense. We bring all their people over here to train them and all the stuff that we've spent our hard-earned money to learn how to do, like fly these really complicated airplanes that we can make over here and then make a few other places. And like we said, there's no training for this essentially no training in countries like China or Saudi Arabia. So they send their people over here to learn how to be airline pilots, because we have that knowledge and they don't.
I went to a USF graduation over the weekend for second lieutenants that graduated out of the military, all the branches. And it was such a powerful speech that I got from one of the lieutenant generals. And he said, bar none, you listen to me, this is the finest, strongest, best military on this planet, bar none.
Mm-hmm.
And, you just get goosebumps when you know, because that is the truth.
Yeah. Well, speaking of truth, that's something that old Adam Schiff doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about. And, this is the guy, like we told you, who lied about Russian collusion for 2 years, who said he'd seen the evidence. There was no evidence. The final conclusion of the Mueller report, there was nothing. And believe me, they looked. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to find something to hang their hat on. They never found anything they could hang their hat on. Remember how he lied about not knowing who the whistleblower is and that the whistleblower didn't contact his office ahead of time? That it came out that, oh, yeah, the whistleblower did contact his office and was in touch with at least two of his staffers who the alleged whistleblower, used to work with. And, of course, the alleged whistleblower even then changed the form that he turned in because he lied on the form. These people they lie until they get caught. Don't you see that? They lie and lie and lie, and then they get caught red-handed. And then they say, oh, that was a mistake. That was an omission. That was an error. That was something that was overlooked.
I watch Adam Schiff, and the only time he talks is when he's mad or lying.
Well, and we've got a clip of him, and here he's going to lie again on this clip. But, there's some funny stuff that's going on with Adam Schiff because Devin Nunes sent him a letter saying he needs rehabilitation. And I just thought that was hilarious. I don't think he means drug rehabilitation, but he just means rehabilitation for being such a liar. But listen to what Adam Schiff wants you to believe about what he didn't know and when he didn't know it.
I'm certainly willing to admit that the Inspector General found serious abuses of FISA that I was unaware of. Had I known of them, Chris, yes, I would have called out the FBI at the same time. But I think it's only fair to judge what we knew at the time, not what would be revealed 2 years later. But yes, there were very serious abuses of the FISA process. They need to be corrected. We need to make sure they never happen again.
Chairman Schiff, thank you.
You hear that? They were very serious. Now he admits it. And
I saw the video. His nose was growing.
He says, I didn't know anything about it. The only problem with that is Devin Nunes put out a memo laying a lot of these abuses out. And what did Adam Schiff do? Did he give any credence to that? Did he listen to his colleague who was telling him exactly what was going on? No, he put out a contra memo stating that all that was not true. And that was around the same time he was coming out and saying that he'd seen the evidence. He'd seen the serious evidence. So these people are just a bunch of liars, and they're empowered to lie by the media, who never calls them on any of this stuff. The media doesn't put Adam Schiff on the hot seat. They don't run hour after hour of coverage about Adam Schiff's many lies, going through one by one, running the clips. In the same way, they don't do that to Jim Comey now, because these guys are hilarious. They're coming out yesterday, and they're just like fessing up to everything, and it's like, well, but let's move on. The point is, what do we do going forward? That's what they want to say. What do we do from here? Okay, so we were wrong. They were right. Okay, but now let's move on. No. You were wrong, and you tried to take down a duly elected president in your wrongness, and you did it against all the evidence, against people. Had you even looked at the evidence that we, the Americans, could see, you would have known that you were wrong. But not only did you have that evidence, but you had a bunch of additional evidence that we, the American people, could not even see. And not a bit of it supported your position. And not only did you not acknowledge that, but then you doubled down on it through the process. And we'll get into some of that with what the IG report found, because, the IG report found 17 significant inaccuracies and omissions in the last FISA applications to spy on Carter Page. In the first one, the IG found 7 significant inaccuracies and omissions. Now, we've talked about this on the show before. Whenever it's something they do wrong, they call it, that was an inaccuracy and an omission. If it was something that you or I did wrong, that'd be lying to the FBI or lying to a federal investigator, right? Or lying to the FISA court. These are lies. These are not just omissions like, oh, we made a mistake. Oh, somebody forgot to put a period at the end of the sentence. No, these are situations where they actually changed evidence. They actually changed the evidence. There's been a criminal referral of FBI lawyer Kevin Kleinsmith. We told you a little bit about him before. He's been criminally referred by the IG because he actually altered the evidence that went into the FISA to try and bolster their case, because the truth was they knew they didn't have a case. Every piece of evidence that they found from the very first FISA that they got in October of 2016 against Carter Page, and that allowed them to go and vacuum up a bunch of communications that Carter Page had with anybody, and then any communications any of those people had with anybody else. So it's a 2-hop rule, and it pulls in a huge amount of communications. And they were able to go vacuum all that up out of the NSA database, including communications that had happened in the past. And they were able to search through those and go through those. And believe me, after $30 million spent on the Mueller investigation, if there was something there, they would have found it. And that's what they just knew. They just knew there was going to be something there. And so that's why they rushed forward into this process, because they just knew they were going to find something dirty about President Trump. And they kept pushing and they kept pushing, because surely soon enough we're going to find a smoking gun. And then everything that we did wrong to get to that point of finding the smoking gun will be covered up. But let's talk a little bit about righteous Jim Comey, because he was on Chris Wallace. And I have to tell you, you got to watch the interview, but Chris Wallace totally gave him a pass. Totally gave him a pass. Never drilled down on any of the specific facts that he could have drilled down on. But he does at least get Comey to make a few admissions, including that the IG found real sloppiness in the, again, if they do it, it's sloppiness, right? If they do it, it's just a mistake, guys. It's nothing intentional. We didn't mean to do it. Well, let me just ask you a question. How many errors did they make in President Trump's favor? How many? How many errors did they make against President Trump? At least 17. How many did they make in his favor, Pat George? 0. 0. Now, wouldn't you imagine that just sloppiness would result in maybe a 50-50 distribution or something close to it? Or maybe they would have just made one error in President Trump's favor. 1 out of 17. Just give us 1 out of 17. No, these were not things that they did by mistake. This was intentional. Listen to James Comey.
Yeah, he's right. I was wrong. I was overconfident in the procedures that the FBI and Justice had built over 20 years. I thought they were robust enough. It's incredibly hard to get a FISA. I was overconfident in those because he's right. There was real sloppiness. 17 things that either should have been in the applications or at least discussed and characterized differently. It was not acceptable. And so he's right. I was wrong.
But you make it sound like you're...
Sorry, I called you, turn it down a little too soon there, Pat George. But, you know,
I'm watching you.
It was the third he's right, I was wrong.
There you go.
He's right, I was wrong. You know what? Nothing to see here. Just move on. I had such faith in the process. I mean, I was just a director. Do you think I knew about any of this? This was happening at levels well below me. That's the kind of thing that Jim Comey said. And I did think, I mean, there's a number of interesting things. You got to watch that interview. We don't have time to do the whole thing. And I don't like to, you know, use too much of Chris Wallace because I really don't care for that guy. I don't like to use too much of what he has to say on the show, and it would be hard to clip it up and not have him talking in it because he was active during the interview. But, you know, there were some funny things that Jim Comey said during that interview that I want you to pay attention to, including the fact that his mother-in-law thinks he's going to prison. He said that during the interview. He's my own mother-in-law thinks I'm going to prison, and I had to tell her, no, mother, these were just mistakes. We had all the best intentions. Nothing bad is going to happen, et cetera, et cetera. But then something else he said, and this just goes to show you what a softball interview this was by Chris Wallace. Jim Comey said, because Chris Wallace said, you know, if you were still FBI director and all this came out, would you resign? And he said, no, I wouldn't, because there were more consequential mistakes that I made while I was director of the FBI. Think about that. Why didn't Chris Wallace say, whoa, what are you talking about? What other mistakes did you make while you were director of the FBI that were more consequential than this? I would like to know the answer to that question, but of course, there was no follow-up. Now, we've got a couple of other clips to share with you. I don't know if we've got time to do the Bill Barr clip in this segment.
I don't think we do, no.
We don't think we do.
As a matter of fact.
Oh, the music. I'll tell you what, the music is always coming. Well, I do want to circle back because we had a couple of others. We had a Ratcliffe clip, which would be run too long, and then we also have a Bill Barr clip. We got to play the Bill Barr clip because, you know, he's the one running things now, and a lot of people don't have faith in him, and I get why they don't have faith in the entire group over there because it's been a lot of talk and no action. But I'll tell you what, Bill Barr and John Durham, they're saying the right things. They did not have to come out last week. Both of them, both Bill Barr and John Durham, came out with a statement that they do not agree with the conclusion of the Inspector General. And remember, the Inspector General basically concluded, yeah, there were significant inaccuracies and omissions, but they weren't intentional and they weren't political. The only reason he did that is because he didn't find a smoking gun, even though, of course, in the text messages, there were smoking guns everywhere. And welcome back to the Morgan Streetman Show. Hey, before we jump into our Bill Barr clip, I just wanted to thank the kind listener who sent me some cookies here to the station in a beautiful tin with a wonderful card. And thank you very much for that Christmas gift. That warms my heart. And, let's jump back in and talk about what Bill Barr had to say. And it's a longer clip, and we don't have a lot of time in this segment, but it's so important to hear what he had to say, in my opinion. And this is the man who's going to be ultimately making some of the decisions along with John Durham. So let's take a moment and listen to that.
Did this?
Well, I think the big picture is this. From day one, remember, they say, okay, we're not going to go to talk to the campaign. We're going to put people in there, wire them up, and have these conversations with people involved in the campaign, because that way we'll get the truth. From the very first day of this investigation, which was July 31st, 2016, all the way to its end in September 2017, there was not one incriminatory bit of evidence to come in. It was all exculpatory. The people that they were taping denied any involvement with Russia, denied the very specific facts that the FBI was relying on. So what happens? The FBI ignores it, presses ahead, withholds that information from the court, withholds critical exculpatory information from the court while it gets a electronic surveillance warrant. It also withholds from the court clear-cut evidence that the dossier that they ultimately relied on to get the FISA warrant was a complete sham. They hid information about the lack of reliability even when they went the first time for the warrant. But in January, after the election, the entire case collapsed when the principal source says, I never told Steele this stuff. And this was all speculation. No, and I have zero information to support this stuff. At that point, when their entire case collapsed, what did they do? They kept on investigating the president and well into his administration after the case collapsed. But here, to me, is the damning thing. They not only didn't tell the court that what they had been relying on was completely rubbish. They actually started putting in things to bolster the Steele report by saying, well, we talked to the sources and they appeared to be truthful. But they don't inform the court that what they're truthful about is that the dossier is false. So that's hard to explain. And the core statement, in my opinion, by the IG is that these irregularities, these misstatements, these omissions were not satisfactorily explained.
Listen to that.
And I think that leaves open the possibility to infer bad faith. I think it's premature now to reach a judgment on that, but I think that further work has to be done, and that's what Durham is doing.
This, of course, is where the Inspector General is most critical of the FBI.
Listen to that. They knew by January of 2017 that Christopher Steele, who, by the way, only had one source for his dossier. He was talking to one other person who was feeding him a bunch of information, and that was a person named Sergei Milyan, who's a U.S. citizen, born in Belarus, former president of the Russian-American Chamber of Commerce, and he was Steele's source. Now, that's not widely reported that he was the source, but if you look into it, you will find that that is reported by people like the Washington Post. So they've admitted that that's Steele's source. They just don't want to talk about the fact that he was just, again, we talk about hearsay. He was just passing on second, third, maybe even fourth-hand hearsay that he supposedly got from his source. But then the FBI went and talked to the source, Sergei Milyan, and he said, Christopher Steele didn't write down what I told him accurately. So the stuff in that dossier is not what I said. He has altered it to make it seem more damaging to the president, and the FBI knew that. But instead of telling the court, like Bill Barr points out, instead of telling the court that that the one source had repudiated Steele's reporting, they instead say that the source appeared to be honest. That's what they say. Honest about what? Honest about the fact that this whole thing is a sham. And listen to the language that Bill Barr uses. He says that the dossier was a complete sham and that the FBI hid the information. That's a big deal. That's big language that he's using. He's not using that because he doesn't have evidence of it. He's using that because that is essentially established in his mind. Now, John Durham's doing the actual investigation and will do the actual prosecutions, if any come from it. And boy, there really need to be prosecutions out of this. And it's not just me saying that. Devin Nunes says if people don't go to jail for this this will go down as probably destroying our country's faith in the justice system. And it probably will, because there are a lot of people out there, and I'm interacting with several of them on Twitter, who are talking about, nothing's going to be done about this. It's just, incident after incident where justice isn't done. I mean, look at Benghazi. Look at the Hillary Clinton email scandal. Look at all of this stuff. Look at the coup, the soft coup that they tried to construct against a duly elected president. And if something is not done about this, if something's not done about the lying, the hiding of information, the using a false document to obtain the most invasive type of surveillance on American citizens that we have that's even possible, if nothing's done about this, and by the way, we haven't even scratched the surface on the scandals that we could talk about which nothing's been done. There's just a few of them. But if nothing's done about this, people are going to naturally conclude, and I couldn't say that they were wrong, that there's two kinds of justice in this country. There's justice for folks like you and me. When we lie to the FBI or don't tell the truth to the FBI, we go to jail for it.
It's like a tug-of-war game. The Democrats, they're not going to lose, so they tie their end onto a tree. And you can pull and do whatever. They're not going to lose. They're going to do anything they can not to lose.
Yeah. Well,
they're going to lose, though.
I hope they're going to lose. I think they're going to lose. I think that there's a reason John Durham and Bill Barr both came out with statements challenging the conclusion of the Inspector General. If they were going to finally conclude that at the end of the day, this was just sloppiness and mistakes, there was no need for them to come out with those statements now. We'll see what happens, but don't look for it to happen too soon, folks. Be patient. Bill Barr's already said that the process he thinks is going to wrap up sometime in late spring or early summer. I'd look for potential indictments of some of these people. And by the way, I sincerely hope that Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe are two that get indicted for their role in this, because they had a lot more than just some passing knowledge of what was going on. They were the instigators. They were the planners. They constructed this, and they even carried out parts of it, like when Comey went to meet with the president to tell him about the dossier so that it could get leaked to the media, and the media would run with it and publish it. Remember that? That happened in January of 2017, after they already knew that this whole thing was salacious and unverified. But now they don't want to take any responsibility for it, and they just said, look, I was wrong, he was right. I was wrong. It's no big deal. I just made a mistake. That's all. Well, we didn't get to get into our Out There, which was going to be all about Lyme disease, but I didn't want to give that too much a short shrift. So we'll come back to that on a future episode and tell you all about Lyme disease and how that may have actually been a U.S. biowarfare project that was released here in the United States. I'm Morgan Streetman, and that's the way I see it. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.